DL5C. I call her Susie. DL5C needs to be 7 inches wide by 5¼ inches high at 200 pixels per inch. Command Option I, that's not the size it is. So let's change the resolution to 200 and the width to 7 inches. Resample, that should be 200. 7 inches gives me 5¼ inches high as specified. I'll say OK. Here's the problem with Susie. Susie's a famous celebrity and needs to be in a particular magazine ad or publication or product endorsement, and she was sent with a photographer down to Fiji, and this is the picture that came back. And you, as the creative director or art director or designer or photo retoucher, have to deal with this because they don't want to spend the money to send little Susie and the photographer back down to Fuji. The sky is perfectly exposed. Everything about the image is perfect except the foreground where Susie is. Susie doesn't have enough light. The photographer should have used a fill flash, or he could have used a large white reflector to reflect some sunlight into the shaded area, but he didn't do that, so you have to fix it. I would like you to fix it using adjustment layers so that they are non-destructive edits. And I would like you to come up with 2 different solutions. For each solution, I want a group. I just click this little folder button at the bottom, and that gives me groups. So each solution will be one group. And I go inside this group. Well, there's no inside to it yet, and add an adjustment layer and try different adjustment layers to see what works. I would like to see you use 2 adjustment layers in each group, but not the same adjustment layers. So for example, I could do hue, saturation, and brightness. And let's see, I could make it brighter, but I'm losing all the contrast there. Also, I forgot to mask it. Before I do that, let me delete that layer. And I'm going to need to mask Susie and her boat, the foreground objects. This should be fairly simple. It gets tricky in a couple of spots. I'm using direct select, gets most of that stuff. However, let's take a closer look here. Let's take the minus lasso, hold the Alt key to get a subtraction, and I'm just going to follow along here because tone-wise, these are so close in value that it's hard to tell which is which. Now, sometimes what you can do is go to the image mode and change it to something like possibly lab color. Don't flatten. And lab color channels here. Channels. Lab color shows the actual density value of the image, the various levels of density throughout the image. A is the red-green balance. B is the blue-yellow balance. So if you're not used to working in, say, just a blue-yellow balance or a red-green balance, you may not want to do that. But if you need to adjust the overall densities without affecting any of the color, you can use the lightness. So using lab color and just link the grayscale seems to make it easier for me to figure out where that shape is. And I could possibly even use the magic wand tool at a somewhat lower tolerance. Let's try 15. To get the parts of this that are background selected, or possibly using the magnetic lasso tool. It could be that the magnetic lasso tool can more easily see exactly where the difference between that shadow and that part of her canoe is. Back to the magic wand tool and select these, or the quick selection tool. And that's pretty good. Command 0. So that's lab color. I'm going to go back to image mode, RGB, don't flatten, and hold the shift key to add to a selection, or in the case of the quick select tool, because it's quick, as long as it has a plus sign on it, it's going to add to the selection. And just add all of these back into that selection. Use the rectangular selection tool, holding the shift to add to the selection to get that part. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so that's the inverse. So Command Shift I to invert that and get little Susie in her boat. Feather that 1 pixel, maybe 1.5 pixels. This is a larger image with slightly more resolution, so I think 1.5 pixels will be okay. And then decide what I want to do here. I would try levels and see if bringing this in will fix little Susie some, and that's pretty good. Now it could be she's getting a little too pink in the face and looks sunburned, so I could add another one that is a hue saturation and lightness correction, and maybe just the reds here. See if I shift the red hues. How does that affect her face? There might be magentas. Let's try the magentas. Yeah, so if I go a little bit more on the yellow side from the magenta, she won't look quite as sunburned. If I lighten that, she's going to look like she's anemic. If I oversaturate it, she looks sunburned. So that's not a bad solution. Now you'll notice that with that new layer, it affects the sky as well as Susie. So what I can do is take this mask and drag the mask up to the group so that the mask now affects everything in the group. So as you see, that's what it's doing to the background. And that's what it does only to the Susie and her boat. And I don't need this mask because it's now an empty mask. So that's one solution. I'd like you to try 2 solutions. One solution using these 2 masks. You could try some other things that affect color balance, brightness, and contrast, and see what else you can come up with that would make little Susie look good enough that we don't have to pay her and the photographer to go back to Fiji. And I know everybody wants to go to Fiji, but we're on a time crunch and we got a budget and we just can't fly back to Fiji because the photographer screwed up one photo. So this group, try brightness and contrast. Turn this one off so you can tell what you're doing. So again, this mask, I'm gonna hold the Alt key and drag this mask to this group. And that copies that to that group. So now if I do things with my brightness and contrast, I'm only affecting Susie. I'm not affecting the rest of it. So levels, hue and saturation, brightness, contrast. I would like you to be able to tell me when you're done with this, which ones of these allow you to adjust color. Black and white doesn't adjust color. Black and white makes it black and white. I'm talking about doing color correction. If you're trying to correct color, which adjustment layers will allow you to correct color? Explore it. That's the end of little Susie. When you're done with those two groups that should each have two types of adjustment layers in them and should give a similar result for Susie, save it as your last name, DL5C, as a layered PSD. Make sure in the image that you are at 7 inches wide, 5 1/4 inches high, at a resolution of 200 pixels per inch. And that takes care of that. I think I'll stop.